Welcome to the Uncommon Senses podcast. In this special series, SustainabiliTEA, where we spill the tea on sustainability, we will discuss issues that centers around the environment and human development, specifically companies, technologies, policies, and individuals. In this series, we have a special co-host, Ms. Lianna. She is currently pursuing a major in sociology and global sustainable development in the University of Warwick. Without further ado, let's get started.
So I'm sure we're all aware of the level of environmental harm human activities have caused, whether that is global warming, climate change, biodiversity loss, resource extraction, pollution, and so on. But how often have we stopped and asked ourselves why, despite all the discussion surrounding the issue, societies aren't progressing the way they should and instead are making things worse in some ways? I'm Lianna.
I'm Talia.
And I'm Joshua.
And in this first episode of the SustainabiliTEA series, we explore some of the structures that shape our everyday lives that are also some of the most fundamental drivers of environmental damage, challenging what we take for granted and turning to our uncommon senses. The climate change we're experiencing today is often referred to as anthropogenic climate change, and that the time period we live in now is the Anthropocene. However, Jason Moore, a scholar, he argues that these terms would suggest that the current environmental crisis is a consequence of human nature and fails to recognize the unequal distribution of wealth and power. And so he proposes this new term called the Capitalocene, like capitalism and Anthropocene, yeah. And capitalism is a system that cheapens nature into a biotariat, so similar to what Marx would say as the proletariat. And it is not only economic, but cultural and political as well. And because nature has essentially been transformed into like this mere profit-making opportunity and tool, and so this idea extends to social issues as well, but then today we're just going to focus on the environmental aspect of it. Our society today is arguably like a consumer society, and that's because our identity is formed and expressed through what we consume. And in a consumer society, no needs are ever fully satisfied and no desire is ultimate. And this is like how freedom is experienced. So let's briefly talk about the history of consumerism first. So throughout the late 1800s to 1900s, there has been like an emergence of large corporations and department stores, as well as technology powered by fossil fuels. And products are no longer produced for subsistence, but for profit. And so this gave rise to a culture that sees consumption as like a pathway towards happiness. And on top of that, business leaders feared that if basic needs are already met, overproduction could become a permanent crisis and economic expansion or growth will not be sustained because consuming power is no longer proportional to production power. And so advertisements on radios and televisions have in some ways become like a silver bullet. And this theorist, American theorist Barney, said that objects are consumed, but what is sold is status. And so because of and eventually when consumerism and like the supply chain has become globalized, they are key to maintaining capitalism's momentum and economic growth we see today. But obviously, continual production, extraction of resources, and using fossil fuels in manufacture and transport, waste generation, and like race to the bottom for lax environmental regulations, like these things are only going to harm the environment endlessly. And so, as Greta Thunberg said, we are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. So, quick question. Do you guys agree that consumerism plays a significant role in your everyday life? And what is your experience of consumerism and what are your thoughts on it?
So when I was looking at it, I completely agree with the whole thing of how, capitalism and also how consumerism is linked to, your status and I guess also in some ways self-expression. And because I'm doing this fashion research and I kind of realized, how people think that, fashion is a way to express yourself. And of course, that means you have to buy a lot of your clothes and you have to, buy a lot of aesthetics that fits your vibe or, that itself, I think it's a huge part of consumerism and how we are kind of basically conditioned to think that it 100% relates to like our own identity, and also how how our happiness just derived from consumerism. That itself, I also definitely can relate it to with my econ course, where we literally have utility functions based on utility, i.e., happiness, based on wealth. So our utility, we assume that our utility function is a function of wealth, which it's basically, I guess, how much power that money plays into our everyday life. I feel like through the idea of fashion, and also through my course in econ, like absolutely consumerism plays a significant role in our everyday life. And I think it's crap. I feel like we I don't think that is the way it should be. And I love how you phrase that, like how you know it shouldn't. Now people are kind of like just producing it for a profit, but not for
Yeah.
subsistence. Yeah.
Yeah.
And totally agree. Like previously, fashion, it's not something to express yourself, but it's just a practical garment for you to wear, and you can wear it for a long time. But now it is definitely for profit because they have trends and stuff. And of course, these fashion industries are gonna invent or like create these trends because they want you to keep buying, and that's how they generate profit. So yeah, that's my thought on consumerism.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really agree with what you've said. And just to add to, in the idea of consumerism, especially in relation with like environmentalism, I think that it reminds me of this quote I've seen from a Netflix documentary called like The Social Dilemma, which it says if you're not buying the product, you are the product. So I think nowadays commercials and marketing is a lot more insidious in regards to like they're not trying to sell you the benefits you reap from using the product or service, but rather the process of you buying the product or buying the service. So, for example, like I'm sure you're going to talk about like greenwashing later. The idea that you feel good about buying a certain product because you think that you're actually helping the environment, and and I think it's just we're really bombarded with these ideas every day on how we're it really plays on our human instincts to like do good and to like think of ourselves as a good person. So yeah, and I guess that just really links to how consumerism can turn something that is initially an incentive for people to do good and turn it into something that's like profit reaping, and also turn it into something that can be marketable and could could be used by companies for their own benefits instead of really promoting the ethics and moral actions of humanity as a whole.
And also, I think it'll be interesting to think about the cultural aspect of it, because, like Telly, you talked about fashion,
Mhm.
and like fashion is a form of art and it's culture,
Mhm.
right? But then, like, we also have to think about how it works, like
Mm.
with how widespread fast fashion is, and like the actual
Yeah.
mechanisms behind. And sustainable fashion could be an alternative too. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's gonna be hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess some companies are actually like trying to, do that, especially with like the current trends of the green movement. So, have you heard of the brand Patagonia? And like
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I think one of their marketing technique is that I remember walking by their shop window and they showed two like shirts. So they essentially look the same, but one is from the 90s and one is manufactured now. So essentially what they're saying is that like our shirts are very durable, and the reason why we make it so durable and with such high quality is that we want you to wear our shirts for a long
Mm.
time. And it doesn't really give into the idea of like a fast food consumerism where we just wear something and just dispose of something really quickly and start that whole process again. So I think that's a very interesting idea that the company is working towards, like how we can recycle fashion, reuse fashion, also like
Mm.
really involve fashion in our day-to-day environmentalism.
Yeah, like I feel like, and also I love that company. I haven't heard about it, but I really liked how they're really trying to make durable clothes. And I feel like nowadays, like people, I think younger generations, we are like, I guess we're more into thrifting. Especially, I guess I have a friend from Germany, and she's like, if you don't thrift, if you don't buy secondhand, then you're not cool. So I think that's a fun initiative. Like younger people are more aware of it, and like thrifting is kind of like finding a more unique clothes that fits your personality. And we like to be unique, like our generation, I guess. So I think that's also like I guess that's a pretty good thing. But then I don't really see it happening that soon in Hong Kong because there's a lot of hygiene concerns. There's a lot of concerns, I think, and taboos around secondhand clothing. So yeah, and I just feel like that is also one particular change. And also I think we are also buying like clothes from like smaller individual brands that design really just unique clothes. But then the problem with that is also like small individual designers, they're gonna be taken advantage of by fast fashion because when they see your design, they're just gonna mass produce it and at a cheaper price. So yeah, I was crocheting and then I've seen people's crochet work were being like replicated, or like their knitting work were being replicated by Shein. So like that popular fast fashion brand, which is pretty popular in, I think, in the US. So yeah, there's just a lot of problems with this. Like,
I think it's also interesting to think about how, because of consumerism, there's obviously like companies are very rich. And like you mentioned Patagonia, right? I think if I remember correctly, Patagonia's boss actually sold the company to like generate to get money to fight climate change or something. So
oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, just to add a small point is that Patagonia's if you read their like vision and mission statements, it's actually pretty inspiring because I think it's very rare to see a company that really, you know, that's not a like social enterprise to put their entire vision and mission statement into like improving society for the better. And yeah, I think it's just a very inspiring thing for them to do. And I hope that
Sponsor
in the
us,
world
Patagonia. Listen to our
yeah, exactly.
podcast.
I was about to say like this. This feels like it's a increasingly like seems like a commercial for Patagonia. But like I really hope more companies could um not to say that Patagonia is like the own a model for companies to learn from. But I think if more companies are perhaps more like that, maybe consumerism wouldn't be such a big problem in society.
So we are seeing more and more corporations say that they are environmentally friendly in response to a growth in demand for green products and services. But when companies are exploiting this as a marketing technique instead of actually changing their practices, greenwashing becomes an additional issue that we have to tackle. So I'm going to give 2 examples of greenwashing, but obviously there are many, many more out there. The first one I want to share is the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which is a nonprofit alliance, and they created like a nonprofit alliance of different fashion brands, and they created the Higgs Material Sustainability Index. And H&M and other fashion retailers have used it to show a product's environmental impact. However, the index does not include information on whether garments will release microplastics or if they're biodegradable. And at the same time, the brands can actually upload their own data to generate this index. And so quite recently, the Norwegian Consumer Authority warned that the index is actually extremely misleading and that environmental claims made in relation to the index score is unsubstantiated. And so when they put this index like on their website or just when they're advertising like their products, that's greenwashing. And also, like another more personal general critique of H&M is that they developed a conscious collection. And obviously that's just one small part of their entire business model. And I do consider it to fundamentally still be a fast fashion. And like the other example would be TerraCycle, and it is basically a recycling company. And at first, it sounds great because eliminating the idea of waste is their mission and also a registered trademark they use. And they basically work to develop recycling solutions that local curbside recyclers don't have. In other words, you can, as they say on their website, recycle everything. So things like toiletry containers, stationery, snack packages, like even toys and like gloves, like rubber and latex gloves can be recycled. And then different material types are cleaned and then they're sent to third-party partners to process the materials into usable forms and then sold to manufacturing companies who produce the final end product. And companies that partner with TerraCycle would have the TerraCycle logo on their products. However, like a big problem with it is that, first of all, the recycling points for TerraCycle are not actually accessible because there are too few of them, and not a lot of recycling actually takes place because of that. And also, they have been accused of exporting the materials they have collected to other countries, which they said they would never do, as they encourage local recycling. And finally, I just think it is a business itself. So it will always have to feed off of other countries, like greenwashing. And so they greenwash themselves. And it does not actually encourage companies to like reduce their material footprint. Greenwashing is a very frustrating thing. And like the main driver behind greenwashing is arguably just the lack of mandatory disclosure of environmental practices and third-party auditing information, and also the lack of regulation and enforcement against misleading advertising. So telling Joshua, I'm sure both of you have known about greenwashing. So are there any more examples you can think of that you want to share? And also, how does it make you feel when you find out how widespread greenwashing can actually be? And if you ever how you feel about specific cases of greenwashing.
I think a more insidious form of greenwashing that I personally didn't come across, but like I've been seeing online, is that something called astroturfing, which is basically means that you're pretending to be part of a company is like they pretend to be part of a social movement, or they pretend to be to have a message that originates from perhaps like grassroots participants to kind of reinforce their own message. So I guess this practice have been used by a lot of like perhaps like coal or like fracking industries, because they kind of like hire these fake protesters to kind of lobby the government into making more um, into making more lax policies surrounding, you know, mining practices and fracking practices. And I think it's just really like it works off the same mechanism of greenwashing, which is basically to deceive and to exploit people's trust. But I guess it also becomes very dangerous because in the case of astroturfing, they actually have the power. They give companies these power to kind of manipulate and control government organizations and governing bodies. So the institutes that we entrust to kind of control these companies become useless, as you know these companies control these institutions. So it kind of like reverses the role. And another question that I'm left wondering, which I'm also interested to hear like what you guys think, perhaps like after you talk about like greenwashing, is that like do you think companies actually have the ethical responsibility to uphold like these uphold ethical actions, such as environmentalism, or like to do good for society? Do companies and corporations have these responsibilities? If some could argue that they're only there to make money, so why should you know why should they bear the responsibility of doing to do good and to have positive externalities in the first place? So yeah, I guess that's also like another question to ponder.
I really like the examples that Lianna shared, and I especially want to make some, especially the fact that it touches H&M slash fast fashion brand. And I want to talk about TerraCycle, this example. Like I've never heard about this, and I think okay, I'm actually quite skeptical towards the idea of recycling, particularly after like I I'm in a team where we organize a secondhand shop for HKUST students. So we sell stuff that we collected, in the secondhand market, and I'm in charge of upcycling the fabric materials. And after that, I've become really skeptical towards this whole upcycling process because, oh man, it takes a long time to upcycle everything. And I think it's like reduce, reuse, and recycle. You have to reduce and reuse first, like recycle as the last resort, because it takes so much time to actually do that. And looking at this example where they recycle everything, like toiletry containers, stationaries, like just looking at it, I'm getting a panic attack because that's a lot of stuff, and I think it's impossible for one single company to manage all of that. I can totally see this being exported elsewhere because I gonna happen to it because there's just no way. And it also, I think, recycling stuff, or like recycling fabric, let's say, it like perhaps breaking it down to like fibers, oh, that takes a lot of energy, that takes a lot of effort to do, to a point where it might not be, it's very difficult to upscale the whole scheme as well. So yeah, I love this TerraCycle example, and I love how they actually did a lot of recycling, which, like, and right now I feel like it's a very difficult process to really make it a large scale and a company scale level. I think, and also I think responding to Joshua's point on like, how corporates and their ethical responsibilities, I do think that corporates do have a responsibility to do that. Even though just now I said the most important thing lies in reduce and reuse, which typically you think that lies in the power of the consumer. But then there isn't too much that we can actually do. I mean, we can become conscious about all of these things. We can also make our choice to reduce and reuse. But then there's so much things about like marketing, right? Like these H&M, let's say, these fast fashion brands, or like grocery stores, they're gonna produce so much just so their supply is totally higher than your demand, just so they think everything, you see them all perfectly lined up in the store, you feel good about it. That's just kind of like their strategy, which it's kind of very hard for us to really avoid, because they just really push you to buy and buy and buy. And they kind of also, yeah, I just feel like they definitely have the responsibility to make sure they don't oversupply that much, because they have a lot of power to manipulate like consumers as well. So I do think they have the responsibility ethically. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's my response.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, like, a lot of the times, it's been a while since I've done econ, but like environmental issues are often considered just externalities, right? And like the idea of externalities is already a bit, because it just means that it's not part of their like cost or benefit analysis in the first place, or it's not something they actively consider because it affects someone else. It's outside of their problem. And I think in general also, a lot of the times regulations nowadays are like just government attitudes towards companies, is that their role is to make sure that companies can operate fairly, and that companies can do whatever they want instead of actually regulating the outcome of like corporate action. So
Yeah. And if I were to play like a devil's advocate, like, because like I study business, so like even though it's just for IP, but like and what if a company just like you know from their perspective, they're like, my existence is solely to make money. The entire reason why I exist is because I have to maximize stakeholder interest. I'm trying to make money for them. So, why should I care about ethics? Why should I care about what I'm doing to society? It doesn't really concern me. I only want to make money for my shareholders and my owners. Like how we respond to that if like a company spoke like that to you.
Are you serious?
Then it's
Well,
like I won't buy from you anymore.
I don't know, in a very extreme case, then in a very extreme way of putting it would be, if the whole world is going to end, it doesn't matter how much money you're going to make. Or like, you're just not going to have anyone buy your stuff anymore if the world is ending, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a very good argument. I guess it can also like goes back to what we said like last episode about how how you should how you could respond to people who are saying that, oh, sustainability is for people of the next generation. Like you can argue that if the world ends within your the year within the years that you're alive, then you can't really enjoy anything at all because the world is dead and you're in like a post-apocalyptic world. So yeah, I guess it's a really good response to like, I guess companies and people, they're all like members of society and they have certain duties to fulfill in order for society to thrive and for us to thrive as a species.
Yeah. I think to some extent, I'm kind of okay. I just thought about this issue, and I feel like to some extent I'm kind of optimistic that I feel like the world is not going to end because money is way too powerful, honestly. Like if there's monetary incentive, then we're gonna find a solution to solve a problem. And I think we've proven to solve that. Like if not, then pretty much already dead because we are kind of raising our capacity, like our our environmental capacity to a much higher extent than when we were like maybe like 100 years ago, because we feel like there's an opportunity for us to become better and like improve the life because we see a threat. So I just kind of feel like, yeah, at some point when this thing becomes like real and like when people actually realize that the impact of this had on their wealth, then there are going to be people who are going to make changes to that. And I think it's very sad because they didn't change because of they didn't make the world better because of
Yeah.
humanity wise. They think it's the right thing, but like money, they feel like
Yeah.
is a great business opportunity for them. Like I guess moving to Mars, that's a
Mm.
huge thing, which I don't know. It's just I feel like, yeah, okay, Elon Musk, you can do whatever you want. You're rich enough to do that, and yeah, you're rich enough to go. So yeah.
Oh, I love that like argument. It's like 唔見棺材唔流眼淚. It's like people only know like they start panicking if when they see what they're missing. So
Yeah.
I guess it's great that Mother Nature is sending us all these warning signals, giving us
Yeah.
a preview of what
Yeah.
a dead Earth could look like. So yeah, environmentalism very important.
I think something else I wanted to add is that companies are not a person. So it's even harder. So like you can have one person or like a couple of people in that company who are extremely ethical themselves. But then as a company, you have to change a lot to actually be ethical. So I think that adds to the additional challenge.
That is a really interesting point because like that's basically what they're teaching us at university. So let me just ask you this question. Are companies legal persons? Legally speaking, are they a person? Well, it's just like, yeah, what do you think?
No.
Actually, surprisingly, they are, because the 14th Amendment of the United States like Constitution stated that, companies like human beings, they have freedom, they have the right to own property, and they have the right to like, devote to kind of like for politics and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's very interesting. Like companies are actually technically considered like legal people. So, but
Yeah.
I think Lianna also raised a really good point because I think you referenced something like I forgot who said it, but like someone actually said that companies, although they're legal persons, they have no body to incarcerate and they have no soul to save. which basically means that, unlike a person, they don't have a moral consciousness because it's basically an entity made of like just a bunch of people who can have like completely different views, and the only thing that unites them is the ability for the corporation or the company to make money. So like, in that sense, corporations, although they're considered a legal person, they're not exactly what you would expect a ethical, like a conscious thinking person to be. So yeah, I think that's a very interesting point of view of how much power we give corporations. Like we're basically giving them human rights, even though they can't really think like a normal, rational human does. So yeah, I think that's a very interesting.
So recognizing them as legal persons is basically a loophole. Like you're letting them, you're not, that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's very funny because like the 14th Amendment was originally supposed to like protect the rights of like recently liberated black slaves. But then in that year that it's passed, 90%, like around like 90 or 80% of the cases in court was about corporations, like companies defending their rights rather than like, these former slaves defending their rights. So it's very yeah, I guess we can talk more about it later on how like social policies can sometimes have a adverse effect and how they could like help the wrong person, so to speak.